Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where have you heard those words before? Listen again and see if you remember who wrote these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who wrote those important words? Hint: he was a founding father and wonderful writer. He lived at Monticello, and he became the third president. Thomas Jefferson wrote them as part of our Declaration of Independence. Remember how the founders felt that they were not being treated fairly by the British? They did not feel that they were being treated equally or the same as the British on the other side of the ocean, or the British who actually lived in the country of Great Britain. The colonists wanted liberty or freedom from the rules of the British. And so, when Jefferson sat down to write these famous words, he wanted to make sure that the new American nation would treat its people fairly. Again, when the founders met to write our Constitution of the United States, they wrote about liberty and justice. Justice means fairness. So they were writing about freedom and fairness when they wrote about liberty and justice. When we hold our hands over our hearts and pledge allegiance to our country, our final words are with liberty and justice for all. These are important words written by our founders, but not all people were treated fairly in the American colonies. Let's look back at the 1700s, during and after the war, when the founders were busy writing these important words. Whom did they mean by we when they wrote in the Constitution, "We, the people of the United States"? Some people say they must just have been thinking about themselves, a group of white men who made the laws of the land. Were they forgetting the other people on the continent? Native Americans who had lived there the longest? Women and enslaved Africans? It is highly likely that they did not actually view these people as equal, or sometimes even as people. These were very smart men, though, writing words that they knew would be read and reread by others for many years to come. They knew that things might change, and they were writing for the future. Nevertheless, it is true that not everyone in colonial times was treated equally, and even today people are still seeking liberty and justice for all. That means that not all people always get fairness or equality. During the Revolutionary War, women had different roles than they have today. Although today many women serve in our military and help protect us by fighting in wars, this wasn't the case during the Revolutionary War or most of America's history. Some women wanted to be soldiers, but they were not allowed to join the army. We know that some women actually disguised themselves by dressing like men so they could fight alongside them. One of the most famous of these women was Deborah Sampson, who fought in the war under the name of Robert Shurtleff. Women were also not allowed to vote, and in fact, all women did not receive the right to vote in America for nearly 150 years after the Constitution was written. Was that liberty and justice for all? There were many people from Africa who were brought to America against their will and enslaved by the colonists. When the colonists decided to fight for their freedom from Great Britain, they themselves were keeping freedom from a large number of Africans by enslaving them. These Africans did not have the freedom to choose how to live their lives, and many people were often cruel to them. Slavery was especially common in the South, where huge plantations had large amounts of land to farm, and colonists depended upon the unpaid work of enslaved Africans. In the New England and Middle states, slavery started to disappear after the Revolutionary War. However, African Americans did not have many rights even in those states. Slavery continued for a long time in the South, where these large farms were located. Enslaved Africans were not allowed to vote. Was that liberty and justice for all? For a long time, Native Americans lived on the North American continent alone, yet life for them began changing when the first European explorers arrived hundreds of years before the Revolutionary War. You will remember that some of them chose to help the colonists and trade with them when they first arrived. However, it wasn't long before the colonists started exploring lands to the west, forcing Native Americans off their land. Native Americans also were not allowed to vote. Was that liberty and justice for all? So what do you think? Was the decision of our nation's founders to fight a 6-year war for independence a wise decision? It probably was. The government they set up 200 years ago has served as a model for the rest of the world ever since. It was certainly not fair to all people in the early years, and there are still many ways in which it can be improved. Not all people receive the same access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is up to us, we the people, to make each day a better day for all of us.